Hello, professionals. My name is Rico Aladdin. I'm the founder of Professional Launch and the host of the Professional Launch podcast. Today, we are so grateful to have Chancellor Hagerott. So we are talking about history of AI today with Mark, and this is part of our AI podcast series that is going on. So thank you so much, Mark, for being here on Professional Launch to talk about the history of AI, and also before we start the conversation, I want to give a shout out to people who help us. We are a nonprofit organization, and we have friends, guests who support this podcast that keep us going. So we want to thank you so much. And one more note: this year we are part of Giving Hearts Day. So Giving Hearts, please find Professional Lounge on the Giving Hearts Day website and support us. Early giving already started, so you can go on there right now and find us and support our podcast, support our events, support the development of our mentoring platform. So thank you so much for that. Now to the history of AI. Mark, thank you again for being on professional on the podcast. So can you give us an overview of the early beginnings of artificial intelligence, AI, and when did that idea first emerge?
Yeah, and thank you, Rico, for having this podcast because I know this will be recorded, but just about 18 hours ago, the President of the United States announced a massive initiative. $500 billion is the number he used, called Stargate for artificial intelligence in the United States. He had a meeting in the White House with a guy named Sam Altman. We'll talk about him briefly. Larry Ellison of Oracle. I mean, the world is changing in front of our eyes, and understanding a little bit of how we got here is helpful to all of us. So for your listeners, think if you woke up in a hotel room and had no idea where you were yesterday or the day before, or how you got here, or who your networks of friends you developed over time, or lessons you learned from life, you'd be very hard to function for some time. And I think that's why people having a perspective on the evolution of technology, which is now becoming AI,
Yep.
how we got here, in the amount of time we have here, which I guess is about a half hour podcast. So big news just came out yesterday, massive news, kind of the equivalent of the Manhattan Project and Apollo combined. I think some people are talking about the amount of money, but so AI, or basically intelligent machines, have been anticipated for a long time. Okay. The idea is, unnatural life, unnatural intelligence. And it was only in the 1950s that the word artificial intelligence was even agreed upon, really. So now it seems to stick. It kind of makes sense. It's artificial, it's not natural, right?
Mhm.
Which is typically human. Though maybe in this talk or maybe a future talk, there are now some theorists out of Silicon Valley that are starting to say, well, it might actually become alive, and that opens up for any of the listeners who are philosopher or history students or whatnot, huge, huge questions for our generation and your generation and generations to come on, how we accommodate the emergence of this thing called artificial intelligence. So, real quickly, probably the first person to anticipate the artificial and write about it, other than just talking about it around a campfire or a steam engine, was a lady named Mary Shelley. And your listeners may recognize her name, but she published a book called Frankenstein, actually not under her name, because typically men did the writing in those days, but it was a young lady. And she was inspired by watching steam engines, right, which were using energy to do work, which was a new thing. That was a new thing, to use energy to do work, and just the size of them probably and the gears. And then she saw some experiments on frogs, like in a biology lab, using galvanic, shocks, and saw them react, meaning there's an electrical life force. And she put two and two together incredibly and wrote the story Frankenstein, which was artificial life and artificial intelligence, re-brought back to life by, Dr. Frankenstein. But then there's been a series of people since that time. 1871, there's a guy named Samuel Butler who wrote a book called Erewhon, which is the word nowhere kind of flipped, because he says he had this incredible insight that the recent Darwinian theories that came out in 1859, within just 10 or 11 years, he said, but you know what? Darwinian processes might apply to machines. Look how fast locomotives are developing. Look how fast artillery is developing. This is a trajectory of evolution which could lead to intelligent machines. And he actually, in his book, has a book they talk about called Darwin and the Machines. So as far back as Samuel Butler, he began to speculate, like, could we lose control of this? There was a guy named Ian Forster early in the century who wrote a book called The Machine Stops. We get more and more dependent on machines, and then somehow they stop. But the real thinkers that we identify with were Isaac Asimov in the 40s and early 50s, and then a guy named Alan Turing, who has an incredible imagination and thought about the universal machine, developed the idea of a Turing test. And a guy named Norbert Wiener, who developed a concept called cybernetics, which is about machines doing more and more work, sensing, like think of your eyes, sensing, thinking, doing basic computation like a brain, and then acting, like a robot, or in his case, anti-air artillery in World War II. So there are a bunch of people getting around this idea, but when they had a conference in the 1950s, sadly, Turing passed away around that time, and then Norbert Wiener was just too hard to get along with. So a group came together. Claude Shannon was one, but a guy named McCarthy in I think it was New Hampshire, and they termed the word artificial intelligence, that computers could start doing more and more things. And then we're off to the races with science fiction movies, Space Odyssey 2001 with HAL, and then any number of Terminator movies, fill in your blank. And so a lot of people thought it was just kind of goofy until 2011 when the computer wins Jeopardy. That was IBM. And then a few years later, which really got the Chinese motivated, was a high-powered large language model, basically being worked on by what became OpenAI, wins the game of Go, basically, against the champion of the world. And the Chinese, I'm told, between China, Japan, Korea, like 250 million people watched this match. And when they saw that algorithm could beat a human being in one of the most complex games ever devised, that's when they went all in. And then the world became aware of this in November 2022, when ChatGPT, kind of on a whim, released it, what's called Generative Pre-trained Transformer, GPT-3, in a chat function. And for your listeners, the co-founder of OpenAI that did this is a North Dakota person named Bronfman. Went to school in Grand Forks, actually went to UND for a few classes, then dropped out successfully, I think, of a couple Ivy League powerful schools, and realized the world was now going to see the emergence of these machines. And he now is in that world, being very influential in the world. So there's kind of history in a nutshell, but we can go where you want to from there.
Yeah, I have probably 1,000 follow-up questions. But I know the time is not on our side today.
Yeah.
But you mentioned Turing test. What's that?
Okay, so
Mhm.
so Turing was a very unusual man. Sadly, in those days, if you were of a different sexual orientation, they made it against the law, and they actually would poison you to try to kill off kind of your I guess libido, whatever. So Turing was very unique, mathematician, brilliant, and if you watch the movie called The Imitation Game with Cumberbatch, I think that plays Turing. He postulates that, well, what is thinking? Why couldn't a machine think? And back in those days, because he helped build the machine called Colossus, which helped win World War II, broke the German code. So Turing later received like the highest honor from the Queen and an apology for what they did to him in his later years. But he said, if a computer could fool you and think it's human, that would be a sign of having intelligence, and that was called the Turing test. That they set up a certain test that if you communicated with the computer over typing, not in person, of course, because then you can use tactile measurements like the touch and the feel, whether it's human, but just information. Could the computer basically imitate and led you believe it was of human intelligence? And that was the Turing test. And some believe with ChatGPT, we're pretty close to being there if we haven't already crossed that, because you get a 10, 11-year-old communicating with ChatGPT, they're probably going to believe they are talking with another person on the other end. In fact, in many ways, ChatGPT knows far more knowledge than any human being does, right? If we would do it on that test alone.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a Turing test. Go ahead.
Yeah.
What are the questions? Run on down the list.
Yeah. So how have AI evolved in terms of okay, can we discuss a little bit the influence of AI on some industries, at least like
Yeah,
healthcare and finance
sure.
and transportation? Yeah.
Yeah, so AI has a couple of categories. People just say the
Hmm.
word artificial intelligence,
Yeah.
but they also have a word called ASI or ANI, which is artificial specialized intelligence or artificial narrow intelligence. So for many years now, we've had very powerful narrow artificial intelligence that are, basically protecting us right now on this streaming video from cyber attacks, right? They will pick up that someone's trying to get in through, the port. I'm a former cybersecurity professor, but port 443 is secure stuff, but then I think port 20 is open. So right now we probably have a form of artificial intelligence blocking people trying to come in and take over your show. Okay. And thank goodness for that. But it's not going to write a symphony. It's not going to write a painting, not going to make a movie. Okay. Also in power plants, you have those type of things, but also power regulators that make the engines run very efficiently, which in the old days would have been a human at a Watt steam engine adjusting steam and water flows, right? Medical care, right? Oh my gosh. Narrow intelligence on radiography is already increasing the diagnosis of tuberculosis in third world countries where they don't have enough doctors. But now you can go into a machine with a fairly low trained tech in a third world country, take these shots, and AI can read them and already tell the person you have tuberculosis, and then they can go to the pharmacy and get the antibiotics to save their lives without a human doctor ever being involved. Okay. So
Wow.
those are some of those smaller ones. The powerful ones that we're seeing, the large language models, are where it literally can communicate much of the world's knowledge with you in conversation. It's now adding a voice feature. That is getting closer to what's called artificial general intelligence, which is like the general intelligence of a human being, which would then ride on top of specialized knowledge. And so those are kind of the two categories. The narrow, think of stock trading algorithms, very narrow, but then evolving up to a human level intelligence, which people generally do not believe we're there, but there's many who think we're getting very close as we add more computers, more compute power to that task.
Wow. Wonderful, wonderful. So, uh, how has the debate around, artificial intelligence potential to
Mhm.
surpass human intelligence,
Mhm.
over the years? Has
Oh,
that evolved
oh,
in
great
any?
question. You
Yeah.
could have been in our class. So our class that I taught with Dennis Cooley, which we'll offer again next year,
Hmm.
was Artificial Intelligence and Society, the history and philosophy of the human and machine. Um, and it's interesting. So many, probably of your listeners, have a philosophy of religion. Maybe they're Catholic, Protestant, Muslim, Jewish, right? They may have theories of economics, right? They are kind of a free market, laissez-faire capitalism, or they might be planned economy, socialist, or in the case of Russia, I don't know what Russia is, but some form of communism and capitalism, right? And there's philosophies of in literature, or sorry, just general philosophy, postmodernism, deconstruction. And interestingly, many audiences I talk to haven't even thought about a philosophy of technology, but they're out there actually. Okay.
Yeah.
And so much like what Mary Shelley started off, uh, Dr. Cooley and I kind of bucketed the human reaction to changing technology in kind of a couple categories. One was just alarmist, um, which would be Mary Shelley, right? Would be
Mm.
Cameron and the Terminator. Um, Something happening. Look at that. It's terrifying. There's something happening over there. Well, what's your plan? I have no plan. I'm just going to scare the wits out of you, and you think about what you're going to do. Okay, so alarmist, lots and lots of those movies. That's what they are, right? Then there are people that really are overwhelmed, and they're escapist, right? The preppers, the others that this is just too overwhelming for them. And as a former military guy, charged in my life many times I was a ship captain and I was in Afghanistan. The younger generation expects us older people to help them and not escape to our mountain home or our island. And one of the most profound disappointments I've had among many of our elites when I watch them is there are several elites that really are just opting to not engage this massive transformation of our society right now. I don't want to name them on here, but they have like dual citizenship in New Zealand as a favorite place, a small island country where if things get really, complicated, they don't have to deal with unemployment and the other many things that might happen in a disruptive period. Then there's people that just want to stop technology. Okay, they just want to stop it. Technology is like a life force. Humans eons ago became reliant on technology, right? I mean, how many of us could kill, a deer with our bare hands and eat it? Maybe a few of those football players, in the playoffs could do it, right? But most of us couldn't run fast enough to catch them and couldn't wrestle the thing down, right? So we have been dependent on spears and arrows and then guns and then, farms,
Yeah.
So the idea of just stopping technology, it's going to emerge. And that leads us to the fourth category of people, and that is people who are prone to then reconstruct and adapt, transform, and still preserve the best of humanity and our civilization. Now, sadly, boy, humans have a very checkered history with that, right? I mean, we invented ships and we carried millions of slaves from Africa to America. Ships that should have been used for exploration and moving food and willing immigrants, right? But you look at those technologies, they were horrific, right? We invented gunpowder, a guy named Nobel did, to help with mining and stuff like that. And they turned it into bombs, which is why we have the Nobel Prize. Because he's like, my gosh, you took my invention, which was meant to save miners, is my recollection, from wearing their shoulders out with pickaxes. And you turn it into bombs, right? And we killed literally millions upon millions of people in World War I, World War II, whatnot. And then, of course, nuclear energy, which may be the absolute key. I'm a former chief engineer of a dual reactor plant. It may be the answer to climate change and adequate energy to keep us, here in North Dakota. We all appreciate energy, right? We wouldn't be alive in North Dakota without it.
Hmm.
Maybe you could live in South Florida with just, the sun and the breeze. But here we know we need that. Well, nuclear energy also led to the bomb. People who watched the movie Oppenheimer, right? But now we have these reactor plants that they are keeping the lights on in much part of the world, right? So anyway, that's been kind of the human struggle with this. And for your student listeners, the tragic killing right around Christmas by an elite educated UPenn computer science type of guy. I forget his name, but he gunned down that medical executive. In his
Oh,
little written manifesto, he referenced the Unabomber. The Unabomber is the worst case of an escapist stop technology guy that literally would kill people to try to stop technological change and lived off by himself. Didn't even help in the local food bank. Didn't help teach kids. He was like a Harvard mathematician. He could have done so much to help inner city kids, rural kids, but he was escapist and violent. And this young man quoted him. And I'm thinking, how could this young man who had such a promising life not have a class like Dennis Cooley and I taught, right? Because
Mhm.
I'll go so far to say is if you would have heard Dr. Cooley's ethics lecture, he may never have killed this guy because you go, oh my gosh, this is totally unethical and technology is changing, but I engage this in a more constructive way. Let me start a nonprofit on, humane healthcare, right? Whatever. So I want to your listeners, I
Mhm.
really encourage them to listen to your podcast that you're going to be having with Dr. Cooley, because I believe this is the question of our time. And if I could read to you just briefly
Sure.
the article that just came out on Trump's massive AI initiative, this $500 billion initiative. Um, it says the Stargate AI project is a bold gamble to secure America's place in the AI revolution. Will they be able to deliver? That remains to be
Hmm.
seen. But one thing is clear in the race to define the future, the United States just went all in. The stakes could not be higher, and the world is watching.
Hmm.
So, that for your listeners, that is what we are talking about. That since Mary Shelley, 1817, whenever she wrote her science fiction book, and you all are living now when it is now happening. So, I hope your listeners never have a dull day because they are going to have to help adapt themselves and their life and their thinking to this new world of intelligent machines. They're going to have to help their family, their neighborhoods, in which I want to applaud you. You're building a community of Fargo people and maybe Western Minnesota, maybe the Twin Cities eventually, to think about these things. And then you need to help your state, right? I'm in the state capitol now, down the legislature. They are grappling with these, right? I mean, there are bills, everything from libraries. What does a library mean in the future if you upload everything into the cloud and you don't have any control anymore? Is that a good thing? Or should you keep certain books that you can read without AI interfacing, right?
Yeah.
There's bills about deep fakes. There are bills about getting compute power for North Dakotans to build businesses, right? But then our nation, as the article said, we are in an arms race with countries that have very different attitudes toward human beings. Look at the drones that Russia has unleashed on human beings. These are AI, low-level AI controlled robots. And then the Chinese, what they're doing to the Uyghurs in Western China, right? It's genocide, but they're using surveillance and advanced technology. And then America, we're not perfect. What we did with enslaving humans for 300 years is just, or 250 years is just shocking. But we're working on those things, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The Democratic minority leader in the House is an African American man, right? We had President Obama, we were working on these. But there is a decided difference between a country like ours and Canadians and Western Europeans and AI arms race and the other people, right? And I hope
Yeah.
President Trump can negotiate a way to stop this because there is a habit of losing control in arms races, right? I mean, it's not a good thing, but the stakes could never be higher for both people on their own human level of building community with other humans and balancing how you interact with machines and deep fakes, as well as our state and the nation. But I think we have time for maybe two more questions. I know we started a little late.
Sure, sure. Absolutely.
Other
I
questions.
have one question it's about academic and research community. In what ways has the academic and research community contributed to accelerating the progress of AI?
Oh, well, absolutely. It
Mhm.
came out of academia. Okay. We don't have time to get into this too much in this
Okay.
lecture, but I've given several talks. Um, I argue that the world is splitting into three realms. Three realms. There's the one that is occupied by humans and animals and nature. Then humans began to connect with machines more than nature. Think of horsepower is an old phrase for engines because horses were the
Hmm.
power. Well, it's now cars and trucks and whatnot, and it's going to be robots, right? Tesla's robots, the drones. So a world of robots where literally, like in Will Smith's movie I, Robot, we're going to have to think of the rules of how many robots can walk in Manhattan when all the humans are there, right? I mean, just so a world of humans and nature, robots and machines, and then this really weird thing called the metaverse. Okay. And I
Yeah.
was giving this talk for years. And then 2 days before I was on a stage in Philadelphia, Zuckerberg announced the metaverse. And then everybody got it because I show this Venn diagram of humans and nature overlapping with machines and robots, and then the metaverse. So academics have built much of this. Even Watt, who created the steam engine, there was no mechanical engineering at the time, but he
Yeah.
was clearly a scientific engineer measuring. His name's on every light bulb, right? I mean, he measured energy. He built the first regulator. He was an early academic. Okay, um, but the internet itself, of which the data for training AI to bring AI, you know, alive, so to speak, um, came out of research labs. 1969, Utah, Berkeley, Stanford, I think, brought the internet alive using U.S. government money, research money.
Mhm.
A guy named Geoffrey Hinton just won the Nobel Prize, and he was a professor out of Britain. And so it was an academic who did the research. It was called neural networks. There's a lot of history of the dead ends in AI. Neural networks was considered a dead end until a guy like Geoffrey Hinton and one of his students and a few others just kept working on it. And that became the breakthrough of November 22, were neural networks. He was an academic.
Mhm.
Now, some of the people getting control of all this stuff are business people, right? Elon Musk, Sam Altman, they're big business people. I think they care about our country. I think, Elon Musk has several children. He's obviously volunteering to work for nothing in this government,
Yeah.
which might scare some people, but I think he's driven to try to make the world a better place. But the academics, the researchers laid the foundation for this stuff, and business people, like most inventions, then they begin to create it out from there.
Okay. Well, okay. I have one more question, and after that, we can call it good. So looking forward, what do you think the next chapter in AI's history would look like? I mean, what are some of the most, developments on the horizon?
Well, let's see. Let me just put it a couple levels. At the human level and community,
Mm,
um, there's a guy named Jonathan Haidt who wrote a book called The Anxious Generation. Bill Gates recommended like 4 books. Two of them I had our class, Dennis School, I had the class reading sections. Jonathan Haidt, The Anxious Generation, talking about what the breakdown of natural human community is doing to anxiety levels. So at the personal level, people are going to have to develop their philosophy, their approach to technology. And I think every teacher in North Dakota should have some training on this. When I retire as a chancellor, I want to try to help teachers in North Dakota. I'm already helping at NDSU. I think every pastor, every church group, if they're not having Sunday school classes to help people think about this, they're missing a profound responsibility, right? Um, at the level of states and communities, this will be a huge efficiency measure. It'll save so much money. It's already saving power plants money by identifying, waste and efficiencies. So business people and civic leaders need to embrace this technology just to, save money, be more efficient, put more money in the bank for the future generations, right? Um, and then at the university level, we have to be able to provide the tools to faculty and students to research this stuff. And if we don't, that's going to be the detriment of our students, right? They've got to have these tools to do this research. Otherwise, they're not going to get the articles published. Reviewers will look at it going, oh, okay, so a student from the University of Iowa was able to use these large language models to analyze this crop variant, but in North Dakota, we didn't have that for them, and we'll publish the Iowa one. I mean, it's going to have real consequences for our business people and our entrepreneurs and startup people like you. And then lastly, I'd say at the cosmic macro level, nations are going to have to find a way to have a peaceful world with intelligent machines that don't get control of weapons of mass destruction. But then also at the macro level, if there's any philosophers listening, we've got to have some philosophers like we had, Immanuel Kant, a catastrophe philosopher, Marx, misinterpreting industrialization, Karl Marx and leading to just the destruction of Russian people and Chinese people on a scale that was, but he was trying to reconstruct, right? Remember, he didn't escape. He didn't try to stop it. He tried to reconstruct a society, and the academics failed. The moderates failed because they didn't come up with a theory, right? So philosophers coming up with a philosophy technology that societies can structure around is going to be urgent need for that. So that's what I see coming. Lots and lots of work. We're in the early stages of this. It's too early to see, what happens, but we've got people from a family level, community level, business, government, to the philosophers have all got to, start working on this. And we in North Dakota, need to get the means to help people do that, which means having the machines, right? I mean, you couldn't do mechanical engineering if you couldn't have a lab testing metals and engines, right? So we've got to have that for the students. But thanks for having me on.